And we're going to discuss how we have to protect our minds. If we protect our minds, then that protects our body. So we have like psychic immune system. I have to be really careful what words I say, because otherwise it's going to blow up the algorithms. So we're not going to talk about certain subjects which are covered endlessly, and the situation which we have lived through now for 2 years exactly, which was pretty insane. We've survived it actually. My friends and I, we've never gotten sick during this whole time, which is rare. Usually I have bronchitis once a winter. And so we're doing something right, and I'm not even allowed to tell you what I'm doing, except I'm taking a ton of prophylactics. It would be like 6 feet of plastic bottles lined up on a table. If you can imagine, let's say about 24, 2 dozen products. And so we have to stay alive, and we have to stay sane, and we have to stay functional and free. Here we go. So we're in this Uranus-Saturn square, 90-degree square still, and it defines 2022. We were in it in all of 2021, and this is a very challenging condition, because Uranus pretty much it's very tricky to come in a spaceship through a medieval square. So the Saturn-Uranus 90-degree square that defined all of 21, which was really the year of the absurd, that is still in effect now, and that square provokes or mirrors a lot of the problems we're living. This is also going to define the crashing of the economy. The whole financial economic system will probably come apart now. And it also defines societal upheaval, potential of civil wars. You notice in the German-speaking countries of Europe, they have, returned to totalitarianism. We had thought they survived it and their minds had been changed. And it seems like it's either a mind genetic thing or default programming, mind control probably, with the towers, where they can influence the emotions and the thinking of the people. So we'll see how all this develops. This square here was built by James I, the King of Aragon, and this was done in 1122. In other words, exactly 900 years ago. We're right now just a few more days from the start of 2022. And this is a radiant zone. I've talked to you a lot about radiant zones, about, self-sustained, decentralized, self-sufficient, networked operations. And as old as this looks, this has been rebuilt and rebuilt. So you see elements that are Cathar, then architecture clearly Templar from the 13th and 14th century. And then later comes the Gothic Renaissance type builders. And today there's a lot going on here. There are guest houses, hotels and restaurants here. They have operations going. I'm involved in some of them. We're doing our projects. It's very important that we do projects. We can meet people. We can keep functioning. Very important, we keep functioning through these years of insanity. And things are going well. This whole place was always an affluent time, an affluent energy. It's a power spot. And even during the times of the Black Death or pestilence, which was 1300 46 to 53, I think, or 7 years of Black Death. They used to have certificates during that time, can you believe it? So we're doing this again with the certificates, although this time we really have nothing. So I think they're copying the bad pieces of history and try to put it into the future, but it's not going to work. This place, for instance, over there, is going to keep functioning. As I said, it's affluent. We need to not move and think out of a space of scarcity. That's not going to work. If you think in terms of scarcity, that's what you're going to attract. If we think in terms of plenty and what we can do, then you'll see plenty, and you will see some level of fortune building up. So this brings us to Dr. Peter Navarro in Trump time. I will give you at the end of this clip a number of names that I would like you to look into. And those are names that you need to study. I'm not going to talk about it because it has to do with the medical situation, and I'm not a doctor, so I don't want to speak about it. But I can talk about Trump, who I've met a few times, a long time ago, like 25 years ago we met a few times. And this is Dr. Peter Navarro, who is the economist from Harvard. He was his go-to tough guy, kind of man who took care of everything from the deal with the Chinese throughout the last year, 2020, when he had to handle everything that went down. 2020 was a very unfortunate year for Trump because he simply did not take action when he had to, right? When COVID came along, he let it sail and let the dwarf handle it, and that was that. And when the riots came, he didn't handle it. He should have, by constitution, he was obliged to put military forces in. He wouldn't do it. And then at the end, the election, when he went south, he didn't do anything about that either. So those are three corners of the equation he let roll. Navarro then wrote this book called In Trump Time, and where he describes the last year and what went down and how it happened. And if you're interested in how this last year of Trump developed, here's the book. It's an excellent book. I've read it twice. It's a very fast read also, in which he goes through what happened, how it happened, who did what, and he speaks, as always, very open, very clear text. He's the most outspoken, but also the most direct speaking person. He does not, like Trump, talk in circles. He goes to the subject. And so you see, our reality is not only a three-dimensional construct like this old square from 1122. The king of Aragon gave them a license to do stuff here. They could have markets and they could trade and they could make things happen. They were free. He gave them freedom. Our reality is not a 3D construct. It is really also a construct of our mind. And in that superior psyche inhabits the inferior vessel. The planets affect, in a way, or mirror the revolution of the mind that is now going on. Uranus, Saturn, Pluto, Neptune, the conjunction of Jupiter and Neptune now in 4 months, in April 22. And then you see 3-4 years later, in 25, 26, comes Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is of a completely different nature than Jupiter with Neptune. Jupiter with Neptune will simply, as I said, aggrandize and exaggerate all of the subjects, anything from economy to Bitcoin. For instance, we may see Bitcoin cruising to $200,000, $400,000, $420,000, maybe $425,000, and then back down to maybe $80,000. This then has to do with, over the next few years, the Federal Reserve and the entire central banking system clearly falling apart. So the planets affect the revolutions of the mind, and we then receive, I explained to you that we have to protect our mind, we have to protect our thinking, We then have what we establish as a psychic immunity. The current planets reveal the war on the psyche, right? We're at war now. I told you 2 years ago, we're at war. A war with China, I mean the Chinese Communist Party. We're at war practically on all segments, areas of the spectrum. We're in a war of the mind. It's an information, disinformation warfare. We're at war in economic warfare, technological warfare, and we're sort of going into kinetic war as well. So without our mind, there is no immunity, you understand? You have to protect your mind, okay? The body is then kind of like the servant of the mind and of the psyche. And this immunity I'm talking about comes from within our mind. So I'm going into the aspect of the challenges that we are ahead now, right? We're going into 2 to 3 really massively disturbing years that are going to really pull apart society. So you have to stay safe, obviously. You have to create radiant zones around you, which are not just a physical 3-dimensional attribute of where you live and who you have around, etc. It's to do really with your mind, we discussed. You see, a lot of people now, they're simply ignorant. That's not a problem. If you don't want to be ignorant, you can cure this right away by studying, by researching. So as you learn things, you're not ignorant. Like for instance, 2 years ago, I'm educated as a military, right? Combat officer, intelligence officer. I had no clue, absolutely no fucking clue about virology, immunology, epidemiology, vaccinology. Do you think I had any clue? None. So I had to study. It took me a year to really study and look at all these doctors, of which I will give you the names at the end. Where stupidity is a totally different story, right? Stupidity has to do with compliance, really. People do things that are against their interest. That's stupidity. Even when they're not ignorant, even when they know things, they tend to still do things against their own interests. These are subjects that we need to overcome, and fast. We've got about 3-4 months, Jupiter, Neptune, to understand what's going on. So this is a growth process, the mindset, the power to create, right? We have to wake up, very simply, and not be in fear. We are subjected to an entire fear machine that has been launched in early 2020. Actually, on the same day as Trump was signing this Chinese deal, was the day when we knew very clearly that the virus, the biological weapon, was on its way. It had already reached us here in Europe and in the US, the 15th of January, right? That was also the day, by the way, when Saturn passed Pluto in the conjunction, and then as Jupiter passed Pluto 3 months later, that was April 2020, we had this gigantic exaggeration of the statistics, I would say, you know, the cases, the hospitalization, and the death rates. And frankly, I don't trust the statistics, because they are most likely also faked, because everything's fake now. With Neptune in Pisces and Jupiter coming in, again, we will see exaggeration and magnifying of everything that's fake, as well as disinformation, as well as there is a higher level awareness. The higher level of awareness that we're moving into will help us get through the next 2 to 3 years. Because this isn't just the next few months with Jupiter, Neptune, this is going to be all the way up to 25, 26 with Saturn, Neptune, and which is a complex time for the economy, for the whole societal structure. Saturn is structural, where we're going to see society come apart, and this is why we are going to have to be safe, physically safe, I mean, as well as mentally, psychically, spiritually safe. It's a whole conglomerate of things where we have to pull ourselves together and every day be aware of every moment, what we're doing, who we meet, what we say, with whom we talk, while doing our projects, while, you know, building a restaurant, building a guest house, doing a small boutique hotel, getting constructive. We have to be constructive over the next few years to get through this. And with that, we will not only survive it, we will thrive in the next 3 years. I can add one more point on a very constructive note. Once we pass 2024-25, this alignment Saturn Neptune in Pisces and Aries right on the cusp, we then move into 2030. What changes then are the alignments between Pluto, Uranus, and in the middle of them at 60 degrees each, Neptune. So Pluto, Uranus in a 120 degree cycle is a very elegant change dynamic where things will happen faster and much more easier. It's technological in nature, network, decentralized, right? Uranus in Gemini then and Pluto in Aquarius. That will be a lot better than all this what we've now lived through for the last, say, 10 years, where Pluto was in very harsh aspects to other planets and was basically taking everything apart that we don't need. I mean, there's a lot of things that don't work anymore. The central bank system, the whole financial, economical system, it does not work, so it needs to go away. And first it has to go away before we can build something new. It's not that we will build on a destroyed structure only, we have to change the structure, we have to come up with new systems. Uranus, Pluto from 25 to 2030 is definitely about system management, information technology, and also energy technology. It's time we figure out that we can use cleaner energies that are to a large degree self-sustained. I give you an example. The French have to now close down their old decrepit nuclear reactor, and that's the right thing to do because otherwise there'll be accidents like Fukushima and Chernobyl. Now the Russians have learned from Chernobyl. They have now the ability to put mini nuke plants on a larger ship and float it out and power up a whole area in the Arctic, which is a very hostile environment. If you go to the Arctic, you'll know what we're talking about. So they can actually power up a situation in the middle of nowhere with their mini nuke plants. So why can't the Europeans build miniature nuke plants in, relatively nice climate and power up their countries? The governments are basically dumb, right? I mean, you understand, they're very stupid, okay? They do things against their interests, as well as they're ignorant, as well as they do not wish to learn. So there comes a time when these governments will move away. Like, for instance, these people who created the entire medical situation that we went through the last 2 years, they will be held accountable, and the parameter for holding them responsible is the Nuremberg Code. The Nuremberg Code came about in August 1947. That's 80 years ago or so soon. And it made of 10 points, right? And the very first point, that's the one that was violated right away. It has to do with voluntary consent. That's verbatim the first few words of the code. That voluntary consent is the most important element in a medical experiment. I will talk about that more and about what's going to happen and also about the astrology in the next 2 years. In Trump time. We are in a zone now of time that I would call like Montauk biowarfare. I mean, we are in biowar. This is a psychological operation that has been pulled on the whole planet. Right at the moment I explained to you when Saturn passed over Pluto in Capricorn, that was on the 15th of January 2020. The actual biowar began at the moment when the bioweapon was released, and we understand this was actually in August or September at the latest of 2019. I mean, Trump actually was told in November, believe it or not, that there were dead bodies at the laboratory in Wuhan. But for some reason they didn't exactly know in detail what was going on, so they just let 2 more months roll. And it is in that 2 months November, December and January that the whole thing was spread over the whole planet. This is why I explained to you the psychic immune system. What do we need to do to be immune? It's okay, you can take prophylactics and all the stuff the doctors will tell you, and I take them. I mean, if I showed you my plastic bottles and all the pills and stuff I take, it's like 2 meters if you line them up on a table. But really, it's a psychic immune system that helps then your body. So, we have to stay now, I'll repeat, self-sustained, right? Self-organized, self-sufficient, and decentralized, and network connected. You have to stay sane, you have to stay safe and healthy, obviously, and functional and free. So again, I'm showing you these old squares because we have a lot of projects that involve guest houses, boutique hotels, and hospitality business. Hospitality business is a very beautiful and elegant business, but it's also the most difficult, right? Because you're working with people, clients, some of them are not in good shape, not in good mood, not, ignorant, stupid, etc. But you have to be nice with them and possibly even educate them. It's a very interesting world, this business of hospitality. It brings you in touch with many people from all over the world, connections and networks, and eventually you can pass on your ideas to people and they think about it. You give them links, you let them look at people like Dr. Rashid Buttar or Patrick Byrne, and let them think about what these two guys talk about, what happened, what's going on now, and what we should do. So again, I wish you the best, and you need to stay free. Protect your mind. Be well, and have a happy new year, 2022. We're on it now in 96 hours. Welcome, my friends. It's the 1st of January 2022. Let's make this a great year in our lives, in our existence, in our work, no matter what will unfold. This clip is in answer to some of your questions based on my previous film document in the medieval square. So we're starting out this year 22 on an astrological note with Mercury direct and Venus retrograde for over a month, all in line of Pluto. That's a stunning aspect for the year, and it defines the year, therefore. Venus retrograde in line of Pluto talks to us really about re-evaluation. And the re-evaluation pertains mainly to alliances, relationships, treaties, and resources, and debt, and money, and what is money, and exchanges. This is January of 2022. Also, within 100 days, we have, as I mentioned, Jupiter in line of Neptune in Pisces. Now Jupiter, as you know, really rules higher law. I'm going to talk about law a lot today, what different kinds of human laws we have, and above all of it is what we know as higher law. And Jupiter is really the teacher of law, of higher law. It rules wisdom, and in short one could say karma. So, my lawyer told me once, about 30 years ago, in Florida, overlooking the waterway over to Palm Beach, he said, Michael, here's a rule. If you let them, they will. And I laughed at him and I said, yeah, that's kind of what I was taught in war college, in military schools. And he said, but this goes to law. If you let them, they will. So let's start with the secret teachings of all ages. This is a beautiful book, a classic by Manly Hall. I've read it about 30 years ago. Studied it. That's a 550-page tome. It discusses all the esoteric teachings that were recorded worldwide. And what is really weird, totally weirded me out, because this is a new edition of the same book, which Manly Hall signed off on in 1928. This is a new edition from copyright 2007 by Wilder Productions, and I would like to carefully listen to this first sentence. It's a disclaimer. It says, this book is a product of its time, 1928, and does not reflect the same values as it would if it were written today. Now listen to this sentence. It doesn't reflect the time. So you have a publisher who is blessed to bring out a new edition in 2007 and have a disclaimer in it saying, watch out, if your children read this, you need to first tell them what this is about. Now imagine in 50 years, a new publisher, after I'm no longer here, republishes Light Seeds and puts this disclaimer in it. Really odd. So we're short of the book burning period again. We're in a time really where we're now flagging published books. That's how absurd it gets. In my book Light Seeds, by the way, so you know, at the very end, I have about a half a dozen pages that delineate all the planetary alignments for each 1st of January. I just chose the 1st of January as a time marker to track the outer planets year by year. So let's go to 2020 and to 22. So Jupiter today in the 1st degree of Pisces, Saturn 12 Aquarius, Uranus 11 Taurus. That's right there, the square that I talked about last time. Neptune at 21 Pisces, Pluto 26 Capricorn, now in the alignment I just said, Mercury, Venus, and Chiron, very important, at 9 Aries. And then it goes on, you can look at the alignments well into 2050, and then I also tracked Pluto beyond 2050 and Neptune beyond 2050. So for instance, we see in March 2175, so that's 2175. That's something like 150 years from now, Neptune will be again in Pisces. That's how long the cycle takes. So this book tracks time into the late part of the 22nd century. You know, many people, there's a whole list I could give you, such as Jim Mars, Colonel Corso, even Alex Jones when he was young, dark journalist, Catherine Austin Fitz as well, I would like to say hi to. They gave us a lot of updates, so did I, by the way, 15 years ago in my book Light Seeds. And the rule of thumb is really, you know, if people do not heed the advice, if they cannot cognitively comprehend what has been said for the last 20 to 40 years, then it looks like people have to experience it, right, and see it for themselves. So, you asked me about this experimental RNA technology that is now in 2022 still ongoing, and the medical ethics and the Nuremberg Code. I'd like you to put to the side the Nuremberg Code, and we're going to go now into the Geneva Conventions. The Geneva Conventions, plural, is a package of 4 conventions starting in the 19th century, finished in 1949, right after Nuremberg Code, and it really delineates the laws of war. Thereafter came a series of protocols. There are at least 3 of them added to the conventions, and one of them is not the same. It's called the Geneva Protocol, and which talks specifically to biological and chemical warfare. You know that several independent studies conducted by industrial engineers and scientists have found contaminants, which are non-organic and non-water soluble materials, that can potentially cause unnecessary suffering. Okay, so this notion of unnecessary suffering is exactly what Geneva Conventions go into. The scientists have discovered a material inside of the experimental RNA technology, and which I would describe simply as an allotrope of carbon, and it's made of a single layer of atoms, and it kind of looks or presents itself, manifests as a honeycomb lattice nanostructure, right? And the material is ultra expensive. A little square centimeter, that's about that, and it weighs less than 1 gram, costs $1,500 today. So that makes it about 40 times more expensive than gold. Gold dust, diamond dust would be cheap compared with this material that they found. One of the scientists said, it's kind of like taking a glass of water and then you go in with a microscope and you find that there are glass particles in it. So the engineer says we had in the past what's known as ABC war, right? That's atomic, biological, chemical warfare. And now we continue in the alphabet in the 21st century, and that D, E, and P. Digital, electronic, psychological warfare. So, you know, there is a question, and people say, yeah, the depopulation agenda, 2030, etc. And to some degree, there's some of that. On the other hand, you know that people are alive, right? It's not that half the planet has died by now. However, when one looks at this material and the quality it has, the material has the quality of a conductor, and it kind of acts like little nano antennas. It can actually create magnetic, electromagnetic fields. The material is so powerful that it creates a field, they say, higher than 10 Tesla. So when one looks at what's going on nowadays, one gets the impression that the material is in those experimental RNA technologies to kind of connect people to, let's say, some sort of central data bank system or frequencies, you know, electromagnetic frequencies. And the strange part is that a German lady who is member of the European Parliament, she wanted to know, as to the question of voluntary consent, Nuremberg Code, what is in the agreements that the pharma system signed with all of the governments. So they gave her documents, she held it up, and half of it was blacked out. And she said, you know what, is this a joke? What am I supposed to do with this? So she represents German people who elected her into the European Parliament. And we know from the research of an Indian media called Vion Gravitas, they had ways to investigate and look into these non-disclosure agreements, that essentially the governments handed over to the pharma system their nations in collateral. in case they will breach the contract or not fulfill certain clauses, the pharma system told them, we'll take over your nation. That's everything. The people, the banks, the governments themselves, the infrastructure, military bases, all of it, you name it. So we have two elements, right? One is a question, what is in it? I asked the doctor, can you tell me what's in this technology? He said, no, I don't know. I said, well, you should know, otherwise how am I giving consent? And do you think, by the way, children 5 to 12 years old can give consent? No. Now, some people say, most of the courts are captive, the judges are bought or blackmailed or threatened or you name it. That's not the case. There are some real judges still around. There are courts that are not captive. I'll give you an example. In Spain, a high court has ruled the lockdowns unconstitutional. Can you believe it? So the lockdowns that took place were later, after the fact, ruled unconstitutional. This means pretty much everything to do with the technology is also unconstitutional. So that's in answer to Nuremberg Code and the Geneva Convention. In addition, there are constitutions, there are rule of law, there are criminal courts, civilian courts. I know there's also military tribunal. So I'm not going to predict which way this whole operation will end, but we know that there are dozens of scientists all over the world who are researching. They're putting the stuff under the microscope and they say, look, here it is. And they're saying to other scientists, please refute us, please grab some samples, analyze them, tell us what you see in it. So after 8 months, no one has refuted what I've just said. The next subject that's really important brings us to the issue of supply chain and energy crisis. These two things are completely related. And they point to a purposeful and premeditated mismanagement. So what can you do about it? Really get your stuff now, whether it's the medications you need, whether it is the vitamins, the supplements, whatever you need to get it now. You need to study as a professional, whatever your work, your business is. If you're a mechanic, if you are a computer expert, if you're a filmmaker, you need new cameras, new computers. You need to have everything that you need, in addition, for maybe 2 to 3 years, in-house stored. Because if your camera breaks, and you say, oh, I need to order a new camera, you may wait a year. If your car doesn't work and you want another car, you may wait another year. I have a friend, he has an old Defender, he had to replace an engine, the engine takes a year to come in, and so on. So we are in this self-made supply chain energy crisis, and we need to think very carefully, go through the list of what we have around us, what do we need every day, professionally, for our work, for our jobs, for our projects. Like if you're a builder and you're in construction, you need to get the materials in way before you're going to use them. The next point, because we're dealing with a lot of vectors in play, has to do and speaks to the subject of economics, world economy, financial systems. So you've seen Turkey is sort of the signal marker now, because Turkey is going basically upside down. So there will be hyperinflation. You will have to think how you save your resources, in what form you save them, etc. I leave that up to you. We're in a phase right now I would call fluid learning. Fluid learning means what I knew 2 months ago and what I know now is already totally different. What I will know 2 months from now, 4 months from now, in the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, is yet another whole story. So we're learning super fast now. This is part of Jupiter. The learning curve goes like this, okay? Steep up. And we need to learn, and fast, what's going on in the world. However, we must not let it affect us. I told us in the last video how we protect our mind. You understand? We're in asymmetric, unrestricted warfare, where almost every aspect of life is at war. There's a war going on humanity, a war against humanity, for humanity, a war on humanity. So a few friends have asked me the classic, I mean it's the perennial question, right? They said, okay, so who rules the governments? Who tells the governments what to do? Who is above them or behind them? And then they say, well, you know, the Davos Club. And then the question, yeah, but who rules the Davos Club, right? Who gives them their orders, marching orders, guidance, whatever? This is why we go back to John A. Keel, I mentioned a few years ago, his famous book, Trojan Horse. That includes Russia too, right? And I said to them, you understand, there is extraterrestrial technology transfer, there is alien interactions, aliens among us here on the planet, in Antarctica, in America, in Russia, in China, wherever. And so there is this interaction between humans and aliens. One cannot deny this. This is a fact of life, and that's been so, by the way, for thousands of years. This is the oldest story of mankind, right? Now there are some extraterrestrials who work via contact with certain humans who maybe from childhood had this contact, and they work for the better of humanity. Kim Castells and I talked about this when we used our pendulum. And then there are others who misguide humanity, who misguide the governments, and who really trick them. You may remember 24 years ago, if you studied it, there was this person, Dr. Anderson, who had defected from an organization that's called ACIO, Advanced Contact Intelligence Organization, which was a part of the NSA, the National Security Agency, that split off, and then within that structure there was yet another split off, which was called the Labyrinth Group. And the boss of that outfit was simply called 15, Mr. 15. And he explained to Anderson and to all the people who worked with him that he didn't trust the Greys. He knew that the Greys were misguiding him. He knew the Greys were trying to trick them, to use certain technologies, to do certain things. You know, they will come up to the scientists and say, hey, you, we've got a new thing here for you. It's really cool because you'll be able to connect and have all the people under control, and you can survey them. It's really cool. And some government said, sounds great, give us this stuff. And this is where we are now, right? So he then said, you know what, I'm not working with these guys. And then he got in contact with a group that he called the Corteum, that gave them other technologies, really time travel technology, blank slate technology to make the planet invisible and so on. And they were working on energy technology. I mean, we do know that there exists energy that is still kept hidden, which will be totally self-sustained and completely clean, but it's not rolled out yet. That's why I said for right now, the only cleanest energy that is somewhat self-sustained that I would know about are these miniature nuclear plants that the Russians are now deploying in the Arctic. So, to end the circle of this question and answer session, the story is really simple. The narratives of all of the governments is falling apart now in 2022. Probably in about 100 days, when Jupiter passes Neptune, we will see this huge magnification and exaggeration of all of the subjects. And when the narrative falls apart, we'll see what happens next. So I just want you to see all of this in the context of a game. Let's say a Go game. If you play Go, it's a very interesting game, very different from chess. Or you can use a chess game as an analogy. So you have the party who plays the white pieces and the other plays the black pieces. Now let's say They are the two world champions, the best players that are on the planet. They can even beat the computer. Let's say it's Kasparov versus Karpov or Fischer, Magnussen, whoever. They are so good at their game that when the game has proceeded to a certain stage, they both know how much longer it's going to go, and they also both know who is going to lose. So let's say one player looks at the board, he studies it, he looks at the other player, he looks back at the board, and he thinks, you know what, I've lost. I am going to lose. In about 11 or 7 moves, it's checkmate. The other guy, he knows he's winning. He knows the other guy has lost. Now, if this is a real chess game among players, which is a very mindful game, classic, traditional, there are behavioral rules to it as well. The losing party will basically reach over, congratulate the other guy, get up and say, fine, you won, the game's over. However, in this real life chess game that we're in right now, the losing party is not going to quit. The losing party is going to extend the game and prolong it as long as it's possible, knowing he has lost. So somebody asked me, well, Michael, how long is this going to take? Is it going to go to the Saturn Neptune alignment, which is about in 25, 26, as I said, that's 4 years from now? Or is it perhaps going on for another 20 years? In 2042 and about there, we're going to go into a situation where Uranus in Virgo will be opposite Pluto in Pisces. The alignment is really at its most precise moment. It's a very long phase of 5 years. Let's say around 2045, 46. So imagine we would have to wait them out for another 20 years. I think it's more likely that we will see the denouement to start already in 2026 in the Saturn Neptune in Pisces cusp Aries alignment. So the long and short of this story is, we know they have lost, they know they have lost, they know we know that they know they have lost, and yet they move on and do another few moves. And I don't mean to scare you, but the moves are going to get more and more crazy. You know, the guy who loses is going to try everything. In fact, he's going to simply try to take everything down with him. He knows I've lost, and instead of getting up and congratulate, he says, you know what, in this case I'm going to take the whole shit down, all of it. And that's the danger zone we're in, right? And to end this on a funny note, it is really up to you to know what I'm talking about. Because otherwise, you know what? It's going to be like tears in the rain. Time to live. It says yes to my secret question. Today it's new moon in Capricorn. We have 4 positions in Capricorn and Pluto is moving to the critical degree of 28 Capricorn. The Secret Destiny of America by Manly P. Hall. So I explained to you Manly P. Hall, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, the big tome. He then did research, 1928 about, in Ojai, California, which is where Krishnamurti lived. And later, this is copyright 1988, Diana Publishing. He wrote a tiny treatise of 50 pages with 20 chapters. And we must understand that this destiny of America 1776 was really initiated in ancient Greece. So I'll just read a few lines that I found remarkable. A new world, was necessary for a new idea. When it was necessary, it was discovered. That which is needed is always near if man has the will to find it. He goes into the dreams and visions of General McClellan, and he ends in the last chapter, which is called The End of the Quest. Philosophy teaches that the completion of the great work of social regeneration must be accomplished not in society, but in man himself. That's Krishnamurti kind of reworded. You know, where there are many laws, there is much lawlessness. This is something my lawyer taught me. He said, when we have like too many laws, we wind up in chaos. So, what is the document about, really? So there's 3 points: the origin, the preservation, and the objective. The origin is that for thousands of years there has existed what might be termed an order of the quest. That civilization has a secret destiny. The great masses of peoples live without the knowledge that they are part of a universal motion in time and space. So I explained to you Jupiter, the teacher of law, Neptune, Pisces, the yin-yang sign. We in universal law now, right? I explained to you human law, higher law, universal law. Preservation. Early development of Europe became the guild of the cathedral builders, right? They started with the Khazars, then the Templars, and on. The architecture became the chosen instrument for the perpetuation of the great design, the building of a perfect world. And the objective, a new Atlantis born out of the resurrection of man and the restitution of the divine. Now I'd like to tell you a story. It's kind of a thriller. You may have heard about it. It's sort of like a legend, but it's true. Let's look first at the astrology of the moment. 4th of July, 1776, at 5 in the afternoon. So you see the sun is still on the horizon in Cancer, with Jupiter and Venus next to it, the two most beneficial planets, Venus and Jupiter. That denotes the birth of a person or of a nation that will be always blessed, lucky, have huge resources in Cancer. The green position in the bottom, by the way, they show the exact moment now, 2nd of January 2022, with a new moon in Capricorn, Venus in Capricorn retrograde in line of Pluto, and Mercury has already passed into Aquarius, reaching Saturn, Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces, and Uranus in Taurus. So the green below is the position right now, and the black that you see inside the circle is the position at the moment where these founders sign the parchment. To be very precise, on the 4th of July 1776, Pluto was in the 28th degree of Capricorn, 27°33 arc minutes. The return of Pluto, this is Pluto now, is a 246-year affair, will happen, to be precise, in the last days of December of 2022. Okay, so now in 11 months and about 3 weeks, which is right after the so-called midterm election. So what this return of Pluto means, we will find out. I will say this is the reincarnation moment of the United States of America. I leave you with that thought. So we have an exact date to the minute in time, 5:10 in the afternoon, that shows us astrologically what's going on. This is how it looks. Those are the guys signing their papers. And here's the story. There was an unknown human being present during the Declaration of Independence. Manly Hall looked into the volumes, the first volumes of the early American speeches and the congressional records which were kept by the Theosophists in California. So you remember that on that great day in the old State House in Philadelphia, a group of patriots gathered for proclaiming the liberty of the American colonies. They knew that they were doing something that would have huge consequences worldwide in terms of universal law. They took security measures. It was like a lodge meeting, if you like. They locked the doors, they had a tiler downstairs, guards, you name it. So no one could come into that space. Everyone who was in the space knew each other, so they knew them face by face, face to face, and if anyone unknown had come in, that wouldn't have worked. So after the lower doors were locked and the guards were posted to prevent any interruptions, an unknown speaker, a voice, was present somewhere on a balcony when the delegates turned to express their gratitude to this man, but he wasn't there, they couldn't see him. And the question always was, who was that strange man who swayed the signers of the Declaration of Independence? His name is unknown. They only heard his voice. They didn't see him. How he entered into the locked and guarded room is unknown, nor is there any record of the manner of his departure. You know, as a joke in between, maybe Trump is the reincarnation of the mysterious man. So, by the way, friends of mine and I have had such interactions, very few times. I personally had 2 such interactions. One of them was in late 2000 in West Palm Beach. You perhaps know that in late 1999 I had published a little treatise, kind of like this treatise here, and in which I had said, late 99, that there would be a recount of the election and Bush would then be president. And I did that together with Jack Barry and a publisher lady and a radio station, so there's enough witnessing of the fact that we did this. So a year later, the event comes around, the recount takes place, and we're in a restaurant where Jack Barry, the famous painter, great Irishman, and I used to have dinner together. And there comes this man up to us, very elegant, tall, very blonde, about 50 years old, clearly human or human looking. And he comes to us and talks to us and said, "You're Barry, the painter, you're St.Clair, the guy who made this prediction?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And we asked him, "Who are you?" And he said, "Well, okay, I work for the government," he said. We didn't get anything more out of him than he works for the government. And we asked him, so what are you doing here? He says, I'm just observing this thing, the recount. I'm not managing it, I'm not overseeing it, I have nothing to do with it. I'm just observing it, and observing you guys and the people, because I want to know what's going on, how do the people react. This is all while they're recounting their hanging charts. And so we meet numerous times, maybe 6 or 7 times in a row, every evening, without appointment. Barry and I just go there because we do what we do every night, having dinner. And this man comes to us, sits down, he has dinner with us, talks to us, he explains to us the American Constitution, the esoteric history, what's going on right now at the end of the year 2000, and he asks me some astrological input, and we have really high-level, intense discussions. And then he says, okay, that's nice, and we say, okay, maybe see you next evening. And he's still there observing this stuff, and one day he was gone. I mean, he didn't come back. We didn't have appointments, but he just left. And Barry and I knew, because you know this like a cat would know from somebody, this was not a normal human being. I would say he was non-human, but not alien, because he looked like a real person, highly intelligent, super intelligent. He knew practically everything about everything that there is to know. And we had really very enlightening discussions for about a week or 2. Anyway, that's the way it went. He comes out of nowhere, leaves, we don't know. So we, process it. So you see, the planets, they align with the universe, with the universal law. And as Jiddu Krishnamurti said, only the profound transformation within the human being will change the planet. You can't push onto a society the change, because the change has to come from you and from me. Each person has to go through this transformation. And so the text by Manly Hall is kind of a complete concept. The ideas are dealing with one single precept. You could call it an axiom or a guideline or rule. And perhaps you have seen 2 weeks ago, third phase of the moon. I like to say hi to those guys. They're brilliant, absolutely fantastic. They have received a film clip from a person who can, with a huge telescope, go into space and see what's going on. So you remember there was the comet, they called it the Christmas comet. Actually it was a solstice comet. And the encounter happened on the 17th of December of 2021. So that's precisely about 2 weeks ago. So imagine there's Venus and there's Earth. And in between comes the comet. That's throwing a tail as long as the distance between Venus and Earth. And behind you also see from the sun coming these waves. And then something absolutely remarkable happens. From behind the Earth comes an object about the size of the Earth, and as it is going right in line of the comet coming in, it opens what you describe as an umbrella, a shield, a parachute, a force field, something that clearly defends the Earth from the comet tail. So I explained to you in the last clip that Mr. 15 was after blank slate technology. And I'm not suggesting this is a human technology that we saw on the telescope film. And probably NASA didn't mean to show this to us, but one can clearly see an object moving in and opening up what we would call a force field that clearly seems to defend or make almost invisible the Earth from the other side to Venus. And in the additional clip, they then showed what looks like the eclipse of Venus. And as an astrologer, I can tell you there was no eclipse of Venus, there was nothing of the kind. So it was only that object that could darken out pieces, parts, a great part, more than 3/4 of Venus. Anyway, the point is, people will see it, that Earth is protected by a higher force, and when people see it, they begin to understand. You see, there are no secrets. It is more that people are unaware of the truth and of reality. Like, you can find this document, it's not secret, it's not hidden, it's published. And later, maybe about 20, 40, 50 years, we will get what is known as the scientific discovery of the human soul. At that point, I think, we'll be more up to par with the extraterrestrials and the aliens among us. My last point pertains to a video I made about 2 years ago. I called it The Holes in Human History. And the point is this: you know that the Jesuits just simply added an I or a J or a 1 to the years. So we're supposed to be now in 2022, but if you then take the 1000 away, we're perhaps really in 1022. And that would then move the history of the ancient Greeks, Atlantis before them, and the Declaration of Independence to another time zone. We then also see this proven because the astrological alignments don't match the history that's being talked about. We also know of photos. I've seen a photo of a castle in Germany taken at one point, and then about 300 years later, and same castle, same point, is no longer in relation to the surrounding environment. So there was a lake before around it, and then all of a sudden there's no more lake, nothing, it sits on a hill, but it's the same castle. So there's clearly a missing history. There's also added pieces of history that were basically interjected, put into the text. There's faked history. And so, largely speaking, most of what we know of our relatively recent human history, 2000 years, there are gaps of understanding, things that weren't there, things that were put in, and we're not really aware actually where we're at in time-space. So you have to think about these things for yourself, research. I said we need to be studying, not be ignorant, and yet not let the information that we receive, the stuff that we can find out, affect us. We need to protect our mind and move forward, being self-sustained, self-organized, and create our own new world, because each one has to do this on his own. Of course, you're going to do it not alone, isolated. You're going to be doing it with your neighbors, your friends, your family, and expand and network. And then as soon as you get there, I think in about 2 to 3 to 4 years, we will have a lot of people doing this kind of venture of staying their ground and staying in a way independent, but we're interdependent, but doing our stuff for ourselves and together. So this is the long and short of our history of where we are moving and what is the destiny of humanity. Because the destiny of America is not secret anymore. It's really the destiny of a universal republic. It's the destiny of the whole planet. So I leave you with that thought, and you make the best of everything that you can figure out and apply. It's very important that the information you get must be applied. It's not just in one ear, out the other. It's like you get it and then transform it into some activity that's productive and helps you and your entourage, the people around you. So you become the creator of a new reality. That's a power to create, right? Welcome, my friends. We're discussing today the year of the water tiger, 2022. We're going to discuss personal medicine, supplements, vitamins, and eventually we discuss the aliens on this planet and how we are the aliens. You know, when I was a kid, I was born 2 months premature. I had always lung problems. It's complicated when you have lung problems. You need to really stay with it or you die. I almost died twice, once at age 6 and then one more time at age 12. So I learned, you know, this is complex in my life, that we need to be our own doctors. I've told you this ages ago, as well as we need to be our own bankers. And you know what, also our own lawyers. So we almost have to learn these 3 things. When it comes to all of these prophylactics, I will call them prophylactics that I use, I'm going simply by the standards of the following criteria. The stuff that you see here is generally antiviral, anti-parasite, antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, and some would say maybe also anti-cancer. In very rare cases, I have to resort to antibiotics. Like if I have an infection, the dentist told me, now you need to do it, don't question it, because I put up a whole fuss, and he says you got to do it. All these products are natural in design, right? There's kefir, water kefir, there is vitamins of all kinds, B, D, all, you name it. And then we even have little liquids that we take every day. I told you I do this every day. Maybe not all of it every day, but parts of it and then other parts, because I kind of switch and change around. Important to know for you that you can grow some of this in your garden. There are things such as turmeric, which is also known as curcuma. You can actually grow it in the house. It just needs light. Put it in whatever, a bag, a wooden container, anything, and it grows. And there will be your turmeric, curcuma. So a lot of these things that we get in these little plastic containers, we can grow them if we know what we're doing. I know a person who grows an actual pharmacy garden, and we can then eat the stuff, put it in soups, in the food, or, you know, eat it raw, basically. So that's the subject of the medicine, that you have to know how to guard yourself against getting sick, that's prophylactic, as well as how to heal yourself in case something goes wrong. You need to know at least the basics. Because I was trained in the military, as I told you, combat officer, intelligence officer, etc. I always had a doctor officer around us. He was a young medical doctor, he was just finishing his degree, and he also had to go to the military like we all had to do, and he, like myself, were actually promoted to have to do specialist type officer school. So he was teaching me all this stuff because he could see every winter I was getting sick, and he said, you can't get sick, you have to stay in one piece. So I had to learn this just to stay alive, okay? So that's that, and now we're moving over. Move this out the way, and we're going to discuss why we are the aliens. You know, how did this Earth's history actually happen? I'll talk to you now a little bit about that. Cheers. When people realize and remember who they really are, they understand quickly what I discuss, as certain notions click in and they wake up in a second. Then they ask me, you know, how did I fall asleep? And I answer, you know, in my Pisces manner, it doesn't matter how you went into amnesia, but you are awake again, thank heavens. So today we're going to talk about a number of things: artifacts, steganography, and then Doris Lessing, Shikasta, and all her work, Canopus and Argos. This is a little artifact. It weighs a lot. It comes from I don't know where. Steganography, you know what this means? It's a set of techniques for hiding secret data within ordinary data to avoid its detection. It's used by news channels. So you'll see a headline saying A, B, C, D, and to you it looks like whatever. But to those who know what the words in the sequence mean, it's a signal. And you know, you can look at my Twitter feed at NewMind99, and there I elaborate in long threads everything I'm talking about in much more detail with sources and all that stuff. And in my clips I give you an overview. So for instance, let's take an example. Tucker Carlson with Ted Cruz. That's the latest example that comes to mind. When you see someone extremely well known, a famous face, whoever, talking, you think they're talking to you because it looks like they're talking to you. They're talking maybe to a journalist, but you feel like they're answering questions that are for you to understand. But you need to actually grasp, they do not talk to us, but to each other and to even their so-called boss, whatever that is. Think of Star Trek. To signal essentially, hey you guys, I back your agenda. That's a form of steganography, the art of hiding secret information inside of ordinary looking data to avoid its detection. So we're going to speak a little bit about the world trials that are coming up, and this leads us to Doris Lessing, Nobel Prize winner of literature, and her work which was first published in 1979. I was then 20 years old. I was a year later going into the army and I had to spend quite a number of years in that club. Sometimes we were a little bit bored, so I had this with me, you know, to do other things with my mind. There are going to be people's trials now taking place. They're not going to be, you know, going to a district attorney in a court in New York City or in some place, wherever, you know, Germany, France, you name it. Those will be trials of the peoples to hold accountable the war criminals. Now, when I talk about aliens and we are the aliens and extraterrestrials, let's make a few things clear. Alien means essentially it's beyond, right? We can't really reach it. It's foreign, it's different. Extraterrestrials are the guys from outside the Earth. And you see, in short, we, the humans that are now here, we were dropped off. We're the product of that. That's why I oftentimes say to people as a joke, we are the aliens. There are mountains on Earth, on this planet here, all over the world. You imagine like Tibet, any mountain you want to imagine. These mountains, the energy, relate to and are still connected to different groups of extraterrestrials. So for instance, the Syrians, the Andromedans, the Pleiadians, and the Nordics. The Nordics, to make this clear to you, are non-aligned to all the rest of it, whereas most of the others are grouped together in what is known as the Galactic Federation. You can imagine that's the extraterrestrial form of United Nations. So they argue there about their trade wars and all their problems. And that's what they do there. Whereas the Nordics, they are non-aligned, right? They're not attached to any of that business. They are, however, at times brought in by the Galactic Federation to be advisors or even arbiters in their conflicts. So in the future, what we're going to see, this is still way out, will be a form of people's constitutions, people's plural, which will mean eventually we will not need countries. This doesn't mean we're going to the notion of global. Forget that word, it's not the right word. I've just told you, they're talking to the others, they're not talking to us. They're using bad words, they're using notions that are meaningless. They mean something to them and to them, but it's not for us. So we should not use their vocabulary, but come up to speak at our level, where we understand each other, and not at their lower level. This also goes into the wingmakers, which is the higher level, even beyond extraterrestrials. What we have as a situation now, I would sum up to say, these people who you think rule the world, the governments, all that stuff, those are vassals or servants, and they obey the summons of a sovereign. So the question always is, who's that sovereign? You must understand, we came from a technological environment, you know, millions of years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago. We came from that technological knowing, and we were designed And we are designed to interact with this higher extraterrestrial technology. You need to also understand we were abandoned here, you know, like shipwrecked. So we're living in this hybrid world. We have to build houses, we have to wear clothes. We're not really designed for the frequency of this planet, but we have to then figure out on our own how to do this. So a cat or a dog or a fish can't do that, right? But humans can. So why can they do that? Well, it's genetically inscribed in their DNA, in our DNA, to reinvent what we once knew. So again, we come from this other knowing. We are not going to it, we're not going to the artifact, we come from it. Again, remember, we need to be our own doctors, our own lawyers, and our own bankers. So, Lessing, this is where it gets interesting. She wrote a series of books, 5 of them, I have 4 here. It was called Canopus in Argos series, right? The 2 that are almost partner books is Shikasta and the Syrian Experiments. This is the same story, but where she tells you the entire history of mankind from these 2 situations. Those were 2 groups of extraterrestrial who were to some degree in conflict with each other. They had decided we're going onto this planet and we're going to do our stuff here, our experiments, whatever it takes. And they had agreements. They said, you take that part of the world, leave us alone, we have this part of the world, and we leave you alone. That was the deal. It didn't work. Eventually everything got mixed up and they got in trouble. She also wrote another book called The Sentimental Agents in the Volian Empire. And thereafter also, this to my view is the best book of her, is called The Making of the Representative for Planet 8. Now, what did the Nobel Prize winner for literature really talk to us about? One could say this is almost the biography of an unknown history, or a biographical history, sorry. And this was written from her recollection by the agents of Canopus. Now let's stop here a second. The way she wrote, you ask yourself, where did this woman know this from? Who taught her this? We do know from her biography that she was taught by the Sufis and also by the Theosophists. She was definitely inside of these 2 setups. She had masters that taught her a lot of secret, hidden stuff, of which they still have documents. One could ask, were they supposed to reveal this obfuscated biography of the Earth? You know, maybe not. But she just grabbed everything and turned it into this fiction package. Shikasta is a gradual, long-term realignment from a balanced harmonic with Canopus, and that descends then to a brutal alignment with a mercenary force called Shamat. She calls it Shamat. We don't know what Shamat is. She never reveals who in the local universe are behind the disruptive mercenaries of Shamat. However, through the eyes and accounts of the agents of Canopus and the assets of Sirius, the shadow effect cast upon the Earth planet from these forces of realignment is detailed and documented. I mean, she goes into appendix, addendum treatises where she has the agent who is recalled give reports, and then out of these reports she rebuilds the history. The struggle to break and reset planet Earth's harmonic alignment with Canopus has not been realized, and the only short comment is that at same point in the future the shadow of Shamat will be cast off, we'll get rid of the mercenaries, as Earth enters a new harmonic alignment. So I've told you as an astrologer, I feel that now, next 100 days, 2022, into the 11 to 15 of April, thereabouts, Jupiter, this massive planet, is going to go in line of Neptune in Pisces. So we talked about this, the exaggeration of all the stuff. The best stuff is the higher learning, awakening, awareness, consciousness. And on the worst side, there is, you know, dystopia, hysteric behavior, hysteria, euphoria, anything irrational. So you have these two elements, the logic and the irrational, meeting in the sign of yin-yang. Now, this is where it gets interesting. In her work, she says that basically, by the end of World War II, science was the most recent ideology. War had immeasurably strengthened it, this whole ideology, and the scientific global governing class in the service of national governments and therefore of war, an invisible global ruling caste, obedient to the war makers, the industries that made weapons, the scientists who served them, could not be easily attacked. Since the formal picture of how the globe was run did not include the real picture. Never has there been such a totalitarian, all-pervasive, all-powerful governing caste anywhere. The citizens of Shikasta, that's the Earth, planet Earth is Shikasta, they remained unaware of what is their governments doing right up to the end. She doesn't say when the end is, but she speaks very clearly of the fact in her knowing that this all began right after the end of World War II. So again, if you're interested in these subjects, if you want to know where we come from, why things are happening now in the way they are, what's taking place, then you may be interested in reading and really studying her work. Again, the way she writes it is from the past tense, from the view of an asset who discusses what he or she, there are several of them, experience on this planet. They were trying to fix the planet, but they had difficulties. However, when you read it in detail, you feel it's almost like a prophecy or a premonition, where she discusses where this whole story went down the line and how it ended. So that is what I wanted to share with you today. So you understand, this is not new to us. We're not even surprised in a way that we're going through the times we're going, you know. I mean, I can say we can state that I'm grateful even to censorship, as it forces us to use new and very precise language. It helps us not to even talk about all these poor notions of nonsense that the others use, making, you know, Mr. Global's narrative, the lies, irrelevant and obsolete. We discuss our things on our level, which only we grasp. You understand what I'm saying? I know what I'm talking about. Do you remember Captain Kirk and Spock? They used to point out to wherever they went what the folks that they encountered, that they needed to be disconnected from whatever hologram computer gods they worshipped. And Spock and Kirk said to them, hey buddies, you must run your own world. You get that? Okay, good. Thank you so much. Oh, and hello to Cliff High. Thank you for everything he does. Thank you.